Hi, I'm Brian Lampman, Senior Suspension Engineer on the Specialized Mountain Bike Suspension Team. I'm here to guide you through the fine-tuning of the suspension on your new 2008 Stumpjumper or Sapphire mountain bike. Setting up the suspension on your new 2008 Stumpjumper or Sapphire is an easy 5-step process.
The first step is to prep your Stumpjumper or Sapphire correctly. That will ease the process of setting up your suspension. Second, set the air pressure for the fork and rear shock. Third, measure the suspension sag and adjust air pressures if necessary. Fourth, set your rebound. Last, set your compression. This process can be performed anywhere and only requires the following items: a high-pressure suspension bicycle pump, a sagometer included with your 2008 Stumpjumper or Sapphire, a measuring tape, the suspension owner's manual, and your riding gear, including your hydration pack full with water. Your riding kit, including your hydration system, is an optional item to simulate actual weight during suspension setup.
The first step in setting up your Stumpjumper or Sapphire is to prep the bicycle.
Make sure to clean any dirt or residue on the suspension components that may interfere with the movement or visibility of the travel indicator O-rings or damping adjustment knobs. Once clean, move the travel indicator O-ring to the dust wipers on both the fork and the rear shock. These travel indicator O-rings indicate how much your suspension moves during riding. If you don't have any O-rings, attach a small zip tie around one of the fork legs or on the shock body. Now adjust your seat to your proper ride height. Next, I'll walk you through the pre-adjustment of the fork and rear shock.
A neutral suspension setup allows for an accurate and consistent sag setup.
Starting at the rear shock, turn the blue compression knob on the reservoir entirely clockwise to the full firm setting. Then back this knob out counterclockwise 1 full revolution. The same process applies to the red rebound knob. Turn the knob entirely clockwise to the full slow setting. Then back this knob out counterclockwise 12 clicks. Moving to the front fork, turn the blue compression knob located on the bottom right fork leg entirely clockwise to the full firm setting. Then back this knob out counterclockwise 1.5 revolutions. Turn the red rebound knob located on the top of the right fork leg entirely clockwise to the full slow setting. Then counterclockwise 1.5 revolutions.
Now that your 2008 Stumpjumper or Sapphire has been prepped, we're ready to move on to step 2, setting the air pressure according to your weight.
For a precise adjustment, wear all riding gear, including hydration system, when weighing yourself to determine the correct pressure setting. Have the suspension owner's manual open to the weight to air pressure matrix visible. Starting with the rear shock, remove the air valve cover located on the shock eyelet. Carefully screw the pump head onto the air valve and measure the current pressure in the shock. Compare your current pressure with the recommended initial pressure to the weight setting in the manual. You will need to inflate or deflate your shock to obtain the correct pressure to your weight setting. To add pressure, gently pump the handle to the recommended initial pressure setting. To deflate air pressure in the shock, gently press the pressure release button on the pump. Now, carefully unscrew the high-pressure suspension pump. For the time being, you can leave the air valve cover off the rear shock until your sag is properly adjusted. Moving to the Specialized S120 fork, remove the air valve cover located on the top of the right fork leg. Carefully screw the pump head onto the air valve and measure the current pressure in the fork. Compare your current pressure with the recommended initial pressure to weight setting in the manual. Like the shock, you will need to inflate or deflate your fork to obtain the correct pressure to weight setting. Just like before, to add pressure, gently pump the handle to the recommended setting. To deflate, press the pressure release button to get the correct setting. For the time being, you can leave the air valve cover off the fork until your sag is properly adjusted.
Once you have the recommended initial pressures in your shock and fork, the next step is to measure and, if necessary, adjust the sag setting on both the fork and rear shock. To measure, you will need an area where you can gently roll on your bike in a seated position.
You will also need your sagometer included with your 2008 Stumpjumper or 2008 Sapphire, and either a tape measure or a ruler. First, ensure your travel indicator O-rings are pushed up against the fork and shock dust wipers. Then, carefully mount your bike as to not compress the suspension more than your body weight. Roll or pedal softly in your seated riding position to help balance your weight on the bike. After rolling 9 to 15 feet, carefully dismount the bike. Look at your shock and use your sagometer included with your Stumpjumper or Sapphire to measure the distance between the shock dust wiper and the travel indicator O-ring. Your sag is set properly if the O-ring falls in the groove of the sagometer as shown. If the O-ring is above the groove in the sagometer, you have too much air pressure in the shock for your weight. Remedy this by decreasing air pressure in the shock with the pump. If the O-ring falls below the groove in the sagometer, you have too little air pressure in the shock for your weight. Remedy this by adding air pressure with the pump. If you needed to increase or decrease pressure, push the O-ring against the rear shock seal. Gently sit on the bike, roll a few meters, and remeasure with the sagometer. Repeat this process until you have the right amount of shock sag. The steps for setting sag are the same for the fork, except the fork is measured with a ruler or a measuring tape. The O-ring should be between 26 and 34 millimeters from the fork dust wiper. If the O-ring is above 34 millimeters, you must add pressure with the pump. If the O-ring is below 18 millimeters, you must decrease pressure with the pressure release valve on the pump. As before, you should reset the O-ring with the dust wiper each time an adjustment is made. After setting your sag, make sure you screw both air valve covers for the shock and the fork back on. Now that you've set your sag, you are ready to dial in the rebound and compression damping. Beginning with the rebound first, for a faster rebounding shock, turn the red rebound knob counterclockwise. For a slower rebounding shock, turn the red rebound knob clockwise. Similar to the shock, set your rebound on the fork by turning the red dial counterclockwise for a faster rebound and clockwise for a slower rebound. Feel free to experiment on the trail, and remember that 1 or 2 clicks of the rebound adjusters for both the fork and shock can have a large effect in the ride characteristics of your suspension. The last step in setting up your suspension on your Stumpjumper or Sapphire is to dial in the compression settings. Because the specialized brain technology does most of the thinking for you, we recommend one setting for the terrain you are riding on. Just set it and forget it. Starting with the shock, we recommend full firm setting for hardpack and asphalt terrain. Turn the blue knob clockwise to the full firm setting. For loose gravel or muddy terrain, we recommend turning the blue knob on the reservoir 1/4 to 3/4 revolutions counterclockwise from the full firm setting. For the fork, turn the blue knob located on the bottom of the right fork leg entirely clockwise to the full firm setting. Then turn the knob counterclockwise 2 to 3 clicks. For loose gravel or muddy terrain, we recommend turning the blue knob 5 to 7 clicks counterclockwise from the full firm setting. Your 2008 Stumpjumper or Sapphire is now set and ready to ride. Make sure to monitor and adjust the compression and rebound settings accordingly. For further in-depth knowledge about suspension theory and the suspension on your 2008 Stumpjumper or Sapphire, go to specialized.com and click on the suspension section of that site.